Attention, first grade class 3. Tyler, please come to the staff room immediately. Tyler, that's my name, just as the announcement said. I'm in my first year of middle school. The call came just as the 5th period was about to end, and I unwillingly became the center of attention. I had no idea why I was being summoned, but they said it was urgent. So I ran through the still empty hallway to the staff room. After knocking and entering the staff room, I stated my class and name and looked around. Just as the end of day chime sounded, the staff room, just after classes had ended, was sparsely populated with teachers. It seemed that the vice principal was the one who had called for me. I rarely ever spoke to him, so with a nervous tension, I approached, and the vice principal sullenly began to speak. "We just got a call from the police. Your parents have been in a traffic accident." The sudden news didn't make sense to me. I was told to hurry to the hospital and was handed a note with the hospital's name, phone number, and the emergency contact. The school had called a taxi for me, and without fully grasping the situation, I was ushered into the cab. As soon as I got in, I showed the note to the driver, and the taxi headed to the hospital. I arrived at the hospital quickly, but was unable to see my parents. I was told they had been in an accident, but there was no sign of the person who must have hit them. Of course not. It was a hit and run. As I waited alone in the empty lobby, eventually, my grandfather showed up. He was my paternal grandfather living in the neighboring town. He had been living alone since my grandmother passed away a few years ago. As the day turned to night, my maternal grandparents and uncle also arrived, but seeing this group together made me uneasy. The last time I saw them all together was at my grandmother's funeral. Ultimately, the day passed without me being able to see my parents. My grandparents were called in first. A little later, a nurse took me somewhere else. We rode the elevator, and the nurse pressed the button for the basement's lowest level. I had had the same experience when my grandmother died, though it was at a different hospital. The elevator stopped, and as I followed the nurse, I thought to myself, just as I suspected. In that room, which I wouldn't exactly call, 2 figures lay covered with clothes over their faces. But I still couldn't believe those 2 were my mom and dad. After all, I hadn't seen their faces yet. The silence was broken by a nurse who then lifted the cloth from their faces. There they were, my mom and dad. Yet, strangely, I still couldn't feel the reality of it. Just the day before yesterday, we were talking normally, and on the day of the accident, they had seen me off to school with smiles. How could this have happened? I was filled with hatred for the person who caused the accident and ran away. If they had just called for an ambulance right away, maybe my parents could have been saved. Was this some kind of cruel joke? Maybe they're just asleep, and they might wake up any minute. Part of me thought this, while another part was strangely calm, thinking my brain just hadn't caught up yet. And maybe with time, the reality would sink in. But time waits for no one, and soon the wake, the funeral, and the cremation are all over. After a few days without my parents, I resolved to live on my own. But a middle school kid can't just live alone in a family rental. I wanted to stay in the home I had shared with my parents, but my grandfather, who lived alone too, decided to take me in. I spent most of my time on the move in the subsequent paperwork, with hardly any time to say goodbye to my friends, and the days flew by in a blur. Then, life with my grandfather began, but he was living on a modest pension. Maybe if he had been a public servant, he would have had a decent pension, but he was just a retired salaried worker living on a meager pension. I wondered if the 2 of us could really make ends meet. With these worries, my new life started. I had to move to the next town and change schools. At my old school, I hadn't joined any clubs, which had been okay, but here it seemed like every student was expected to join one. Thankfully, a teacher understanding my situation allowed me to be an exception. Being the new kid, my seat was at the back of the classroom. The other students had already formed their own groups. Could I blend into this new community? Did they know about my situation? What would I say if they asked about my home? My anxiety didn't end at home. It followed me to school too. Without the courage to speak up, I sat alone until a boy from my class approached me. After introducing himself as Henry, he started badgering me with questions. When he asked about clubs, and I honestly said I wasn't joining any, he seemed really bothered and kept pressing. Why not? I explained that at my old school, clubs were mandatory, and because of family circumstances, I wasn't joining here either. But rules are rules, he snapped back at me. I didn't feel like sharing my whole life story right then and there, and I didn't want to deal with him, so I brushed him off. But Henry got heated and grabbed the back of my collar. I quickly grabbed his shirt front in response. Classmates intervened to break us up, and the commotion brought our teacher running over. But Henry still hadn't cooled off, raising his voice. "You're just living a poor life with your granddad, right? That's why you can't join a club." The homeroom teacher, shouting "Stop it," took Henry to the staff room. Seeing that Henry knew about my situation made me think maybe others knew too. I didn't know how Henry found out. Maybe he overheard the adults talking in the staff room. After finishing scolding Henry, the homeroom teacher returned to the classroom and told me, "Don't worry about it." After school, when I got back to the house where my granddad was waiting, he immediately asked how my day went, how was school. I told him about the trouble with Henry, but his response disappointed me. Instead of comforting me or being on my side, he seemed uninterested. Maybe feeling awkward, he left to go shopping and came back with vegetables and Chinese food ingredients. He put the groceries in the kitchen and started cooking rice. I thought maybe once the rice was done, conversation would naturally follow, but time didn't resolve the tension. School, my parents, and the future. There were things I wanted to talk about, things I needed to say, but my granddad and I didn't exchange a single word, silently eating our dinner. Instead, days passed, and back at school, Henry kept picking on me whenever he got the chance. Conversely, at home, my grandfather and I barely spoke, except about meals. When this was starting to feel like the new normal, I came home from school to find my grandfather lying on the bed. "Tyler, you're back," he asked. It had been a while since we had exchanged words about anything other than food, but finally, we did. Apparently, he had fallen off a ladder while pruning the trees in the yard. He didn't hit his head or back, but instead twisted his leg. That reminded me of the ladder and shears left out in the yard. After discussing it, we decided I would handle the shopping and chores for a while since he couldn't. "I've written everything we need, and here, take this," he said, handing me a note and a supermarket flyer. It was printed with big yellow letters that read "Big Sale." It seems I had to shop there today. Taking the wallet he handed me, I biked to the designated supermarket. I had been there a few times before we moved. It wasn't particularly cheap compared to other supermarkets in the area, but their sale items were a steal. This reminded me of something my mom used to say. Inside the supermarket, I saw signs for sale items everywhere. As I was looking for the items on the list, I unfortunately ran into the last person I wanted to see, Henry. Seeing him at school was stressful enough, let alone bumping into him after school too. Just as I was about to hide, Henry spotted me. "Hey, if it isn't the poor kid, I guess you can only shop on sale days because you're so broke," he sneered. If that's your logic, Then everyone shopping here today is broke, including you, I retorted. A cough from afar interrupted Henry's words. Realizing his comments had made enemies of most of the customers, he tried to switch the subject. But even the change in topic was just more insults aimed at me. To make matters worse, he brought up my deceased parents, saying, "Even if your parents were alive, you'd still be broke." His words made me lunge at him in anger. Henry fought back, but store employees quickly intervened. I could see other shoppers pointing at us, so someone must have called them over. We were quickly separated, and the store warned us that if there was another disturbance, we would be banned. I was still steaming, but I knew making a scene wouldn't help. Yet, as I finished shopping and was about to check out, Henry was waiting for me. "Let's take this outside," he provoked. It was when I took a step forward, falling for Henry's provocation, that someone intervened. I felt a tug on my shoulder from behind. Turning around in surprise, I saw my classmate Anna. She stands out in class, being the daughter of the president of a rather well-known company. When I first heard she was a corporate heiress, I was surprised, but honestly, she doesn't act like a princess at all. Even during breaks, she's just like any other girl, chatting with friends about TV and family stuff. "You don't need to stoop to his level," she said, annoyed that a third party was intervening. I shrugged off Anna's attempt to stop me and turned back to face Henry. "You better back off. This is a world you wouldn't understand." "Princess, and who do you think you're talking to? How dare you speak like that?" she retorted. From Anna's tone, it seemed like Henry couldn't talk back to her, maybe owing her a favor or something. But apparently, that wasn't the case. "It's none of my business," Henry snapped and lunged at Anna. I rushed to intervene, but Anna's knee found its way between Henry's legs with a blow that no man could shrug off. Henry doubled over in pain. I looked at her, still in shock, and she just smiled back and said, "No problem." Henry is certainly annoying, but causing trouble here isn't what your parents would want. "You have to carry on their will, Tyler," she said, confused by her words. I just stood there until she suggested we talk over coffee. "Order whatever you like. It's on me." I was annoyed at being dragged into a cafe with no money, but since she was paying, I ordered a hot tea. As our orders were placed on the table, we both let out a sigh of relief. Then Anna started to speak about what happened earlier. She began, and with a somber face she revealed something unbelievable to me. It turns out that the accident that led to my parents' death was caused by Henry's uncle. Since it's his uncle on his mother's side, they don't share the same last name. That's why maybe the teachers knew, but none of the students did. Still, it felt strange that Anna knew all this. "So, how do you know all this?" I asked. "Henry's uncle used to work at our company," she disclosed. That's when it clicked why she had earlier reprimanded Henry so confidently and went on to give more details. Apparently, Henry's uncle was a troublesome person, and even Henry's family was burdened by him. He was a gambling addict, often showing up at Henry's house unexpectedly to ask for money or calling persistently. And amidst all this, he caused the accident. Moreover, it seemed that the car Henry's uncle was driving at the time of the accident was a company car. He cleverly erased any dent and blood stain as if nothing had happened and kept quiet about it to the company. After the incident, maybe in an effort to make up for the fine, his nuisance behavior intensified. Anna observed. Observing Henry's actions, I can't help but think there's a streak of scum in the family DNA. Not that Henry himself is to blame, so it's hard to hold it against him, she added. That's why, honestly, I owed you an apology too, Tyler. I'm sorry, she said. You don't have to apologize, Anna. Your dad and his company are victims too, right? I replied. As we talked, I realized a lot of time had passed since I left for shopping. Even if I went back now, dinner would be very late. I was going to buy some takeout as a wasteful option when Anna offered to buy dinner for both of us. It seemed like an apology for holding me up. When I got home, my grandfather seemed worried and asked if something happened. He wanted to know everything, including the takeout I was carrying. I explained everything that had happened at the supermarket, what Anna told me, and how she even paid for our order. So you're in the same class as Anna, my grandfather remarked. He didn't seem surprised by the story I relayed. From Anna, the only thing that seemed to catch his attention was that Anna and I were classmates. He mentioned that Anna's grandfather was his childhood friend. The company now run by her father was originally started by her grandfather. There was one thing my grandfather didn't know, that Henry was related to the offender, but he had heard everything else from the police and had even gone to settle matters with Anna's grandfather himself. To my grandfather, it was the accident that took the lives of his son and daughter-in-law. To Anna's grandfather, it was an accident that smeared mud on the company's face and took away a friend's family. The company was already set to provide full support for the upcoming lawsuit, including financial and manpower resources, my grandfather explained. While I was at school, my grandfather had been doing all he could for my parents and me, unaware that my grandfather had been taking such actions. I had fairly felt disappointed reflecting on the argument we had the other day. I apologized to my grandfather, but he dismissed it, telling me not to worry about adult matters and to focus on my studies. However, I wanted to help too, so I decided it was time to express my honest feelings. I can't move forward emotionally or physically until the lawsuit is settled, and there's still so much uncertainty in our lives with school and everything. I confessed. I'm sorry. If we had even a fraction of Anna's family income, you wouldn't have to feel any financial insecurity about the future. I added. My grandfather apologized for not being able to provide a better life for me. Having money wouldn't bring Mom and Dad back to life, nor would it have saved them. Besides, living with Grandpa is pretty fun too, you know. I reassured him. At my words, my grandfather looked up briefly before looking down again. After hearing from Anna and learning about the covert actions my grandfather had taken, I felt a bit comforted. I realized that my parents had been treasured, and even though they were gone, they had not been forgotten by everyone. As I finished talking, my grandfather didn't lift his face and headed to the washroom on his injured leg. He said he was sleepy because he had waited up for me and wanted to wash his face to wake up. But hidden in the sound of running water, I occasionally heard the sound of sobbing. When I noticed this, I inadvertently started crying. True to what my grandfather had told me, trials are slow. The trial for the accident that occurred in my first year of school didn't start until the end of my third year. Thanks to Anna's cooperation, we were able to secure a sizable compensation in the civil case as well as the criminal one. In the strained conversations with my grandfather that had increased after I graduated from middle school and was in my second year of high school, I was contemplating my future path. Considering my grandfather's care, a job nearby seemed sensible. However, I thought he would be upset if I told him so I kept quiet. But my homeroom teacher must have informed my grandfather without my knowledge. Now that the trial is over, you should be able to move on. Are you moving forward now? He asked. This clearly meant he wanted me to pursue further education. There were no financial issues regarding going to college because my grandfather had saved the compensation money. He started doing the household chores again so I could focus on my studies. This meant I couldn't say I wanted to find a job close to home to help my grandfather. The tree that had caused his injury had been completely cut down to eliminate any danger. This same thoroughness had probably helped during the trial preparations. With such careful planning, as if to say I could manage on my own. I decided to go to college as my grandfather wished. I got into university and started living by myself. I often went back to visit my grandfather, but there was a topic he seemed more interested in than my well-being. It was whether I had gotten a girlfriend or not. "I'll bring her over when I have one," I said. "So, you don't have one now?" he'd retort. We kept up our friendly banter despite living apart. But in my second year of university, my grandfather fell, and during the spring break of my third year, he passed away. As if choosing a time when it wouldn't affect my classes, my grandfather passed away quite suddenly. With help from relatives on my mother's side, he was laid to rest in the same grave as my parents. I was saddened, but this time I wouldn't escape from reality. I resolved to fully acknowledge my grandfather's death and live my life straightforwardly. While visiting the grave on the monthly anniversary of his death, I ran into Anna by chance. "It's been a while," she said, startled by our sudden greeting. I agreed to catch up as she suggested. Just like that time before, we ended up at the same cafe we had visited together. Since I hadn't really talked to her since middle school graduation, this could be the first time since then. We caught up on old memories, shared updates about college life, and generally had a lively conversation. Then Anna surprised me with an unexpected suggestion. "Hey, you should come visit my place sometime," she said. Anna and her grandfather had come to my grandfather's funeral, but it had been too hectic to talk much then. I told her I would visit if I had the chance. And then she surprised me further by offering, "Why don't you come intern at our company?" Our company was indeed a major firm, and as a place for an internship, it was impeccable. I accepted her invitation, and we exchanged contact information. I processed the internship for my university and was able to participate successfully. During the internship, I was actually called in by Anna's grandfather, the chairman, which was a bit nerve-wracking, but I managed to have a little conversation with him. He shared stories of his childhood with my grandfather, and then he asked me to tell him about what my grandfather was like when we lived together and about his last days. While we both got a little teary-eyed, I shared all about my grandfather, and we reminisced about him. "Next time, let's have a meal together with Anna too," the chairman said. And with that, I left his office. Since then, I've become a senior in university and received an early job offer. It was from Anna's grandfather's company. Anna herself had decided to work at a different company, saying she didn't want to rely on her family's influence. The truth was she had other things she wanted to do. I was at the cemetery to give an update at the grave. Standing in front of the grave, I feel like my father, mother, and grandfather are all there to greet me. Dad, Mom, Grandpa. I leaned on Anna until the end. But I'm about to become a working adult soon. Thank you for raising me this far. Perhaps I should have said these things while they were still alive, but if I had, my grandfather would probably have said there was no need for such thanks. That's just the kind of person he was. This is the story of my 8 years since losing my parents and living with my grandfather.